Well, good afternoon. We'd like to welcome you here to Stay Curious in the American Space Museum. My name is Nick Thomas, and I'll be your guest host today. Our friend Mark is on vacation, spending time with his grandchild, his mother, and his daughter. So we want to say hey to Mark and wish you happy trails. Hope you're doing well out there. Today, I'm joined by our co-producer, Marty Winkle. Martin, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine, Nick. Hey, are you a turtle?
Am I true? You bet your sweet ass I am. That's a we're going to be talking about that a little later on today about the origins of that and how it figured quite prominently in one of our most successful manned space flights during the Mercury program. We have got a lot to talk about today. We've got a lot to celebrate, and we've got a lot to look forward to, particularly this week in the way of launches. We have tomorrow an Atlas V launch scheduled for 3:36 p.m., and that rocket will be carrying two commercial broadcast satellites. On Wednesday, the launch of a Falcon 9 rocket from Pad 39A and Crew 5, which will be going up to the International Space Station. And that flight will be headed up by astronaut Nicole Mann. The pilot will be Josh Casada, and on board we'll also have Koichi Wakata and Anna Kikina. They'll be going up to the International Space Station to join the crew increment already on board that orbiting outpost. And then on Thursday, we have another Falcon 9 launch, which will be carrying a group of Starlink satellites, those communication satellites that are probably going to be figuring quite prominently in the recovery of Southwest Florida, giving those people some access to internet that they don't have right now. And I believe there are discussions underway with Starlink in the state of Florida to effectuate that. So we'll be watching that situation very closely as well. In the way of celebration, we're going to celebrate two birthdays today. Our friend Charlie Duke celebrating his 87th birthday today. Charlie, the lunar module pilot of Apollo 16. And also astronaut Kathy Sullivan, veteran of 3 space shuttle flights, and the first American woman to perform a spacewalk on STS-41G. So we want to say, wish a very happy birthday to our friends Charlie and Kathy, if you're out there, and wishing you all the very best. Today, also, in the way of celebration, our primary celebration is going to be the 60th anniversary of the Mercury Atlas 8 flight. That was a flight of Sigma 7. With astronaut Wally Schirra, a 6-orbit flight, which was very crucial, very critical to the continued success of America's manned space program. And we're going to be launching into a discussion about that shortly. Back in 1962, of course, we had seen the success of astronaut John Glenn on Friendship 7, and then after that, the flight of Aurora 7 with Scott Carpenter. Scott Carpenter's flight, of course, was plagued with some problems, the greatest of which was the loss of propellant, the overuse of propellant, to the degree that he actually re-entered on empty fuel tanks, both in the auto and manual fuel systems. John Glenn, for the success of that flight, also came in with a narrow fuel margin. And so it was being discussed among NASA management that if we were not able to conduct a simple Earth orbital flight and maintain enough propellant in the tanks, we weren't going to be getting to the moon. So it was decided that the next flight, Mercury Atlas 8, would be strictly a developmental engineering test flight. The purpose was going to be to praise the vehicle and its abilities and its capabilities in Earth orbit. And for that mission, they selected the perfect astronaut, a man by the name of Walter Marty Schirra. Marty was his middle name. And Wally Schirra, one of the original 7 astronauts, a naval aviator, test pilot, and fighter pilot, a veteran of the Korean War. And Wally took what could be called a very hard-nosed approach to Sigma 7. It was going to be purely developmental flight tests. There was going to be a minimum of science being done because some people in NASA thought that we'd gone a little too far with the science on MA7, on Aurora 7 with Scott Carpenter. So Wally's primary goal was to minimize the amount of science, or what he called the Larry Lightbulb stuff, and concentrate strictly on the spacecraft, its capabilities, and its ability to performance mission well. Wally flew a 6-orbit flight around the Earth, and primarily assessing the control system of the Mercury capsule. Now, the Mercury could only maneuver in the axes of what you call roll and yaw and pitch. But the thruster, there were 2 sets of thrusters that performed those maneuvers. One was a set of heavy-powered thrusters, and the others were smaller trim thrusters, if you will. Now, the manual propulsion system on the Mercury capsule could be triggered using the hand controller. The problem was, if you pushed the stick too far, you would go past the fine-tuning thrusters and you'd kick on those high-powered thrusters. And that was a problem that John Glenn fought with, and also Scott Carpenter. There was also a problem with the interconnect of the 2 fuel systems. If you had your switches in the improper configuration, you could actually be using fuel from both tanks, and that happened on Scott's flight. So these were some of the things that the engineers wanted to assess and they wanted to correct for this flight of Sigma 7. And so what Wally did was he spent a lot of time in free drift, simply letting the capsule drift on its own and conserving fuel as much as he could. When he first separated from the booster, in fact, he had performed the pitch round in a very slow mode, taking several minutes to get into orbit attitude. But again, I think he only used 0.5% of his fuel in that maneuver. So you had an idea there what Wally wanted to accomplish. And during that 6-orbit flight, about the only real problem that came up was the problem with the suit temperature. It started to climb to a level that Wally said was comparable to mowing your lawn on a Texas summer day. And they eventually got that problem squared away, and he went on to a very successful 6-orbit flight of Sigma 7. And Marty, if we could bring up that picture of the launch, we want to go back and talk about something that happened during that launch as the vehicle was headed uphill, and a communication that Wally had received from astronaut Deke Slayton. There we see the launch. And there's Sigma 7 taking off from pad 14 out at Cape Canaveral. And shortly after launch, as the vehicle was headed uphill, Capcom Deke Slayton asked Wally, "Are you a turtle?" And you've heard the correct answer earlier in our broadcast. But the Turtles were a group of pilots. We think it started back in World War II. And the deal was, if you were in the officers club or what have you, and you challenged another fellow by saying, "Are you a turtle?" if he did not give the proper response, well, he owed a round of drinks to everyone within earshot. So Deke asking Wally if he was a turtle on an open loop like that certainly put Wally on the spot. But Wally replied, he said, "Going to Vox record only." And so he went to the voice recorder and he recorded his proper answer to that question. And subsequently, when Wally got on the Kearsarge after recovery, there was, Deke Slayton was there, and I think, Walt Williams and several others. They didn't want to know about the spacecraft. They didn't want to know about the control system. They didn't want to know about suit problems. They wanted to know Wally's answer on that tape recorder, and he played it for them. Wally, of course, being one of the prime exponents of the gotcha culture, which is playing a practical joke on a fellow astronaut or member of the launch team. Several stories about some of the classic gotchas that Wally Schirra performed. I had the privilege of meeting Wally for the first time back in the 90s during a pre-brief that I was giving on a shuttle launch. We had a group of VIPs over in the IMAX theater, and as I saw the VIPs walking to the theater, I noticed Wally was in the group. Well, as they all sat down and I went to the podium, I wanted to acknowledge him, but at the same time, I didn't want to blow his cover. So I told the crowd, I said, "Well, ladies and gentlemen, everything's going on well out at the pad. We're getting ready for the launch today. We have a wide variety of people on board the vehicle. We have people from the Air Force. We have people from the Navy. We have scientists. I don't know if we have any turtles or not, but I could find out." And I looked up at Wally, and he smiled and gave me a thumbs up. So we got together and we talked afterwards, and he told me that he was going to be coming back to the Space Center the following week for an event. So that week I'd gone to Cocoa Beach to a little gift shop, and I found a small clay turtle that had a silly smile on its face. I said, "Oh, this is perfect." So I took the turtle and I tied a red ribbon with a note around the turtle's neck. And when I saw Wally again that following week, I said, I've got something for you. And I handed him the turtle, and he looked at the note. And, of course, the note said, "You bet your sweet ass I am." And Wally just laughed like hell. And, in fact, he showed it to Conklin. He said, "Look what this guy just gave me." So we sat around and we talked for a while. And I guess I saw Wally on about 5 or 6 different occasions during my time at the Space Center. In fact, I probably spent as much time with him as any other Mercury astronaut, with the exception of Scott Carpenter. But Wally always had a big smile on his face. He was full of fun, and he lived up to his nickname, which was Sky Ray. So Wally was a force of nature. But at the same time, for all of his good humor and camaraderie, he was definitely a Navy captain. He was going to be the captain of his ship, whether it was Mercury, Gemini, or Apollo, especially during the Apollo program after that terrible fire. And Wally was the commander of the following mission, Apollo 7, and he was very, very strict with the checkouts of that spacecraft, making sure that everything was in good shape and everything was going to be just right. In fact, his Apollo spacecraft, CM-101, was on the test stand over at Downey, California. And he went to visit it one day, and he's dressed up in the full bunny suit and the boots and so forth. And he steps into the spacecraft. The couches were not in there yet, so he had the bare bulkheads. So he stepped in, and he put his foot down inside the spacecraft and apparently stepped on a wire bundle. And an engineer inside the spacecraft just yelled at him and chased him out of the spacecraft. And Wally went down to the supervisor's desk, and he said, "Who's that engineer in 101?" And the supervisor told him who he was. And Wally said, "I want him to get a commendation. That's the kind of guy I want working on my spacecraft." So although Wally could be very hard-nosed about things, he was hard-nosed for all the right reasons. And he applied that also, as I say, to the Sigma 7 flight. If any scientist had approached him about adding some experiments or what have you to the flight plan, Wally would have chased him out of the building, I'm quite sure. Because, as I say, he was dedicated to maintaining this flight as an engineering test flight to test all the capabilities of that spacecraft. And he was the right man at the right time, because after the problems with Scott Carpenter's flight, it was very possible that the program was going to lose a lot of support among the politicians. So Wally realized that this flight was going to be very important in maintaining the capabilities of the Mercury program and also maintaining the trust of the politicians who held the purse strings. Marty, let's see what else we have in Wally's career that we can put up on the screen.
Let's go back to the earlier.
Sure. Yeah, there's the monument to the original 7 astronauts at our memorial park here in Titusville. A beautiful monument, not only the Mercury, but the entire park out there, which is dedicated to the astronauts and the workers for projects Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, the Skylab program, and also the Space Shuttle program. This is, if you will, a replica of the monument that we have out at Launch Pad 14. The same thing, made of structural aluminum that was used in the construction of the Atlas rocket. And at that monument, at the entrance of Pad 14, there is also a time capsule buried under the ground that is scheduled to be opened 100 years hence, thereabouts. And it will have memorabilia and so forth from the Mercury program. So that's a fitting monument to the men and women of Project Mercury. We also have, I think, another picture of the monument out there. So there we have it. Is that Sigma 7, Marty? I can't see from here. Yeah. That's the square for Wally Schirra's Mercury flight, Sigma 7, 6 orbits around the Earth, and a flight, as I say, which really went very, very far in advancing our capabilities for manned spaceflight. There's Wally in his Mercury suit, along with the model of the Mercury capsule in the background, and I think that smile just says it all as far as the personality of this man. There are traces, there's certainly a lot of happiness in that smile, but there's also a bit of determination in that face. I think at that time, Wally was very convinced that this flight was going to be successful, and he was going to do everything he could do to make it successful. So you've got, as I say, a very jolly and very happy fellow, combined with a man of discipline and also of wanting to keep this program on track, continue the advances of the manned space program. We also have his handprints out there at the Mercury Monument out at Spaceview Park. And these hand casts, as I say, of all the astronauts who flew in Mercury and on into Gemini and Apollo. I think, did we get Neil Armstrong's prints, Marty?
Yes, we do. We have it out here also.
Oh, okay.
We have a sample in our display area.
So you can come here to the museum and you can see the handprints of the first man on the moon, astronaut Neil Armstrong.
And we have Buzz Aldrin also.
Also Buzz Aldrin. Going out to the launch pad back in those days, we had the suit-up room up on the second deck of Hangar S, and I had the privilege of visiting that area one time. It was incredible how narrow the corridors were. The corridors were probably only as wide, a little bit wider than my shoulder width. I mean, very, very narrow corridors. And up on the second deck on the far left was the astronaut room, and then beyond that was the medical checkup room and suit-up room, and then beyond that the stairway that led you down. Now you see Wally here coming out of Hangar S. He's carrying that portable air conditioner that's hooked up to him, and heading over to the van to go out to the launch pad over at Complex 14. That suit, as I said, became kind of an issue during the flight because the temperature began to climb rather uncomfortably. But what he found out was if he advanced it in small increments, a little bit at a time, he could regain control over the cooling system. Now, that's not dissimilar to what happens to you in your home. If you crank that air conditioner down to 65 degrees all of a sudden, you'll freeze up the system. And that's apparently what happened on the system in the capsule. So you simply go back to the standing temperature, let it set for a while, and then gradually, very gradually, bring that temperature down in small increments. And that was the solution that Wally came up with on during the flight. Again, a beautiful view of that Atlas vehicle. We have a model of the Atlas with us today. The Atlas, of course, beginning her life as an intercontinental ballistic missile designed to carry nuclear warheads to our targets, and then was man-rated for the Mercury program. And of course, during its developmental program, it had a lot of problems. There were a lot of these things blowing up left and right out here at the Cape in those days. And there's a story when the Mercury astronauts went to see a night launch of an Atlas from Pad 14, and the crew, all the team were inside the blockhouse, and after the vehicle cleared the tower, everybody ran outside to watch this beautiful flame heading up into the sky. Just absolutely gorgeous. And about 45 seconds after the launch, just as the vehicle hit the high Q point, maximum aerodynamic pressure, instead of going through the high Q point, it blew. Big red flame across Florida's night sky. And there was silence among the team for about 15 seconds, and then Gordon Cooper spoke up and he said, "Well, at least I got that one out of the way." But the Atlas rocket went on to perform brilliantly for the manned Mercury program, and of course performed brilliantly during the Gemini program, taking the Agena docking target up into orbit for the Gemini astronauts. So the Atlas, a very, very important vehicle in our history, and still flying today in the variant of the Atlas V that is now scheduled to carry the next manned spacecraft, the Boeing CST-100, into Earth orbit, providing crews to and from the International Space Station. So the Atlas has a very long, a very distinguished, and a continuing history with our manned space program. Now, Wally was recovered on the Kearsarge. That was the recovery vehicle for the recovery carrier for Sigma 7. And after he had splashed down and the frogmen had reached the capsule, Wally requested to be taken on board, hoisted onto the deck of the Kearsarge. So a whaling boat towed the capsule to the Kearsarge, and they picked the capsule up and put it up onto the deck. And Wally called for the crew to clear the area so he could blow the hatch. Now this was rather important because, as you remember, Gus Grissom on Liberty Bell 7 suffered the premature detonation of the hatch when he was in the water, and its capsule sank, of course. And there were whispers among some people that Gus had somehow caused a detonation of that hatch. Well, it was known that hatch explosive device, once you hit it with your fist, it would recoil rapidly, and it would usually result in either a cut or a bad bruise. So Wally detonated that hatch on the deck of the Kearsarge, and sure enough, he had the bruised knuckles, which Gus did not have, and so that pretty much proved that Gus had not been involved in the detonation of that hatch on Liberty Bell 7. Martin, do we have any questions out there?
Yeah, we have a question from Dave Stangy, and he's asking, is Wally's capsule in the visitor center?
Yeah, David, the capsule is at the Visitors Complex at the Heroes and Legends exhibit. When you're upstairs and you see the two pre-shows of the exhibit, you come into a small hallway which will lead you downstairs, but that hallway will put you right next to Wally's spacecraft. Wally's spacecraft is hanging from the ceiling in front of a recovered Redstone rocket. So yes, indeed, Sigma 7 is still with us here at the KSC Visitors Complex. There we see Sigma 7 on display, as it was actually at the Astronaut Hall of Fame in the old days, which is now the Police Hall of Fame here in Titusville. It was on ground level on a stand, and you could walk around the vehicle and look inside the hatch. And here you have a beautiful view of the heat shield, and you can see the very even distribution of the heat during that reentry. The center of pressure is right there at the center of the heat shield. And what you did after you'd fired the retro rockets and put the capsule into reentry attitude, as soon as the sensors realized that you'd hit 0.05 G, it would put the capsule into a very slow spin, like a bullet going through the chamber of a rifle, and that would evenly distribute the center of pressure and the flames from that reentry. Now you can see here, as I say, it's very evenly distributed, and what had happened was that Wally's natural instinct would have been to fly the reentry manually, but the flight plan said we want to test out the automatic stabilization and control system, the ASCS. So Wally, we want you to do the retrofire and the reentry in ASCS. The only problem with ASCS was that it was a real fuel guzzler, and Wally had gone all that way, saving all that fuel, and now he had to turn it over to the system that was just going to drink it like mad. But you can see the payoff, the use of all that propellant. You've got an evenly distributed center of pressure on that heat shield, and as a result, Wally landed about 5 miles away from the recovery carrier. So well done, Wally, and well done to the engineers who designed that ASCS system. Oh yes, again, the the legendary turtles. We have a close-up of the turtle creed here, and part of the creed is that to be a turtle, you have to think clean. And there was a series of questions that would be asked of a candidate who wanted to be a turtle, and they were very suggestive and very leading questions that could be interpreted in a not so clean way. But the answers themselves were actually quite innocent, and once you could answer those 3 questions, you were in. And Marty, you have those questions? You recall those questions for the turtles?
The ones that I found on Google, or the ones that you know?
The Google ones, yeah, please.
Give me a second.
Okay. Again, if you were a candidate to be a turtle, you had to demonstrate that you had a clean mind and you could have pure thoughts. What do we have, Marty?
What does a cow have 4 of and a woman only 2?
Legs.
Okay. What is a 4-letter word ending in K that means to have intercourse?
Talk.
And what is it on a man that is round and hard, sticks so far out of his pajamas that you can hang a hat on it?
His head. So those were the 3 answers you had to give in order to be a turtle. And as I said, the response to if you are you a turtle had to be you bet your sweet ass I am. Otherwise, you had to order a round of drinks for everyone within earshot. That actually continued all the way through the Apollo program when Wally Schirra was up on orbit during the Apollo 7 mission. During the TV transmissions, he held up a series of cue cards, and one of the cue cards said, "Deke Slayton, are you a turtle today?" And Deke, of course, answered that he was going to record his answer, which he duly did. But that was a little something that they would attempt to catch each other on from time to time. That was the Society of Turtles.
Yeah, the question, are you a turtle, was usually asked when there were women around. And
yes.
Back in those days, there was more, I'll say, refined.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you were surrounded by women, if you were surrounded by people in authority, say like a fleet admiral or something like that, you could expect to have that question thrown at you. And in some instances, it might be thrown out by the officer or official that was there. So you never knew where it was going to come from. You only knew that you were on the spot and you had to furnish the right answer. And yes, the turtle creed that we see right there. Turtles are bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, fearless, and unafraid folk with a fighter pilot attitude. They think clean, they have a lot of fun, and recognize that you never get any place worthwhile in life unless you stick your neck out. That was the credo of the turtles. And yeah, definitely a hearty, hail good fellow group they were. Wally also flew in Project Gemini on Gemini 6, and that was the very first manned mission to accomplish a rendezvous with another manned spacecraft up in Earth orbit. Now, prior to this, the Russians had put 2 spacecraft up at the same time, and I think they got to within 50 miles of each other. And Wally said, if you think you've accomplished rendezvous at 50 miles, have at it, because it takes a lot more than that to accomplish a rendezvous.
Yeah, I think they actually got within 3 miles of each other.
Oh, is that right?
And that was only due to when they launched the second vehicle.
Oh, okay.
They did not rendezvous.
So it was really an off-the-pad rendezvous. There were no maneuvers involved in that. I thank you for that correction, Marty. But Wally was able to bring his spacecraft to within 1 foot of Gemini 7. That was a true rendezvous, and I think Wally talked about the difference between rendezvous and proximity operations, which strictly is what Wally accomplished on Gemini 6, prox ops. And Wally said that rendezvous was like winking at a woman across a crowded room. Prox ops was walking across the room and nibbling on her ear. So that was the difference that Wally placed between those two events. Here we see Wally in the White Room out at Launch Pad 19, and he is with a gentleman who is a legend in our business, a man by the name of Gunther Wendt. Gunther was the pad leader starting with Alan Shepard's flight back in 1961 and performed that same function for Mercury and Gemini. He was not in place during the Apollo 1 fire because he was not a member of the North American team. But one of the things that Wally told North American was that you are going to hire Gunther Wendt and he's going to be in that White Room. And so he was, as he was for the rest of the Apollo and Skylab program. And Gunther had a sense of humor that matched Wally's. It was very playful. It was very irreverent. And quite often, Gunther would give little going-away presents to the astronauts when they came into the White Room before they got inside the spacecraft. I think for Tom Stafford and Gene Cernan, who had suffered several on-pad scrubs for Gemini 9, on the very last attempt, which was successful, Gunther presented them with a 4-foot-tall match to light the candle, as it were, and to get that vehicle going. Martin, what do you have over there?
Tom Usiak is saying Wally dealt with the first on-pad shutdown and launch abort.
Yes, he did, and that was not a planned event. We had it as a planned event in shuttle. I mean, we were prepared for it, and we had procedures for it, but did not have it for that Titan II rocket. And subsequently, as Tom says, on one of the attempts to launch Gemini 6, we had an on-pad shutdown, and Wally literally had a split second to decide whether he was going to stay inside that spacecraft or trigger the ejection seats and blow he and Tom Stafford out of the capsule, a maneuver which would have been very unlikely a maneuver that you could survive. But Wally said that The clock had started inside the spacecraft, but from the bottom of his seat, he did not feel any motion. So he said, okay, the vehicle had not lifted off. The clock had started, but we didn't have liftoff, so he decided to stay with it. And he saved that mission and really managed to remind people, if you will, that the human factor is always important in these things. The computers can do one thing, like start that clock, even though the engines had shut down, but it took a human being inside that spacecraft to realize and to know that that vehicle had not left the launch pad. Here's Wally in the lead up to Sigma 7 with the irrepressible Deke Slayton standing overhead, fellow turtle. And Wally is discussing with two engineers the use of cameras on board Sigma 7. Now, John Glenn was actually the first astronaut to carry a hand camera up into orbit, but Wally had been impressed with the durability and the quality of the Hasselblad camera. And you see a Hasselblad on the table in front of Wally there, and he took that camera up there with him and got some beautiful shots from up on orbit. The Hasselblad being an incredibly fine-tuned instrument, almost I would compare it to a Swiss watch for its delicacy and its accuracy. And one time, several years ago, as I was doing pictures for visitors over at the visitor center, one of these fellows actually handed me a Hasselblad camera. And I think my heart started beating as fast as a weed whacker, just thinking that I had this tens of thousands of dollars of camera in my hands, and I just wanted to take the picture and hand the thing back. But yes, a remarkable instrument, and that was a camera, as I said, that Wally insisted on having on his flight, and was subsequently carried on later flights in the Gemini and the Apollo program. Hasselblad, a very important part of the Apollo program in particular. This is Wally in all of his glory in the flight suit that they had for Apollo 7. And there are some famous pictures of Wally and Walt Cunningham and Don Isley standing around a Corvette in these flight suits, and they all had silk scars, white silk scars around their neck, which sort of underline the nature of the adventurous test pilot. And Wally, when he was up on orbit during the Apollo 7 mission, he had first began suffering the effects of a head cold, and that made him rather irritable, as it were. But more importantly, he realized that the ground was beginning to send up detailed test objectives and procedures that had not been agreed upon during the training. These were all totally new, including the firing of the service propulsion system, the big engine on the service module. And this is part of what caused Wally to, frankly, rebel against mission control, declare himself an onboard flight director, which you can hear on the tapes, when he refused to use the onboard television until they got all the systems squared away on the spacecraft. But we had a page from Apollo 7's checklist, from Wally's checklist for Apollo 7 at the museum years ago, and it was for this unplanned SPS burn. And in pencil, you saw the parameters of the burn that were the TIGO, the TIG, the time of the burn, length of the burn, and things of that nature, all written out and calculated. And after it was all said and done, a comment by Wally, and the comment was, "Idiotic mess, underline, underline." So Wally made his opinion known even to his own checklist. Martin, you have something over there? Oh, okay. But Wally was the commander of his ship. Walt Cunningham, I think, said that Wally was not one of these smiling captains walking up and down the aisle of the airplane saying, "Hello, are you enjoying the flight?" Wally was the captain of his ship. And here he is in the suit-up room getting ready for the launch of Apollo 7, another flight which carried a lot of criticality to it in that it was the first flight after the terrible fire out on Pad 34. And Wally was particular in every aspect of anything having to do with the spacecraft and the crew. And it was all going to be done Wally's way, and he insisted upon that, and rightfully so. I had the pleasure of talking to a gentleman who worked at Downey, California during the development of Apollo 7 when Spacecraft 101 was there. And the guy told me, he said, Wally really kind of gets a bad rap about being ill-tempered. He said the truth was that over in Downey, California, a lot of us were still feeling sorry for ourselves. And he said Wally came through, I'll never forget, he said Wally came through like Patton through the hospital tent. He delivered some well-aimed kicks to the rear for people who were drifting a little too much in their work and didn't have their head in the game. And he insisted that everybody in that workforce be dedicated to making that spacecraft as safe as practical, which they did. And in fact, one of the NASA officials after Apollo 7 declared the flight to be a 101% success. And a lot of that was due to Wally and his nature and his absolute determination to make sure that everything was going to go right and that everybody in that team across the board had their head in the game. Remarkable man. And Wally in later years, Wally as I got to know him back in the 1990s, and there's old Skyray. He's got that smile on his face, and he has his medal from the Astronaut Hall of Fame around his neck. And this is, as I say, this is the Wally Schirra that I knew. After the program, he had done several things in industry, including becoming a spokesman for Actifed, a very famous nasal decongestant. And as I remember, the commercials showed an astronaut having that bubble helmet put on his head, and Wally Schirra stepping into frame and saying, "Do you ever try to sneeze in one of these?" And so Wally was a spokesman for Actifed for many years. He served on several corporate boards. He worked with several charitable organizations, including the Astronaut Hall of Fame. So he was a well-rounded individual, and I will tell you without any amount of doubt that Wally Schirra enjoyed life. He was really a remarkable guy. We'd like to say a very quick hello to some of our friends who are watching this broadcast today. We have Doug Forrest. We have Dave Strange. Our old friend Carlton Bailey is out there. Carlton, good to have you out there. Tom Usiak again. Larry Geriel, I believe that is. And, of course, we have the redoubtable Marquette out there watching from vacation land. Mark, I've also compared this. I told people, I said, yeah, I'm going to be Joey Bishop to Mark's Johnny Carson. So, yes, I'm Joey Bishop, and Johnny's on vacation in Las Vegas. He'll be back next week. Ben Husett, Robert Law, Tom Celentano, okay, William Whiting, Larry Puskar, okay, Steve Hammer, and Neil 1030. So we would like to welcome you all to today's broadcast. We hope you're enjoying it. We hope that everyone out there, or as many of you as possible, came through Hurricane Ian very well. Many folks, of course, did not, and our thoughts and prayers are with them as they should be. Here we have two friends on the in the White Room for Endeavor over at the OPF. That's Jim Lovell on the left, veteran of 2 Gemini flights and 2 Apollo flights. And, of course, with them, our friend Wally Schirra. 2 people of very, very similar temperament. Very level-headed, very even. As Wally would say, the idea was to maintain an even strain, and Jim Lovell did that quite well. Jim Lovell, also a Navy captain and also a captain of his ship, the right man at the right place at the right time when that terrible explosion on Apollo 13 happened. And it was good that Jim Lovell was there during that accident to bring the crew home. So you've got 2 fellows there of good humor, but of strong naval discipline. 2 finely disciplined naval aviators. And a great close-up of Wally. I think that this is over at the visitors complex, as a matter of fact. Wally's usual uniform when he came to visit us was a loud Hawaiian shirt, which was very reflective of his personality and of his nature. And we have a picture of our friend Marquette standing alongside the image of astronaut Wally Schirra. And Wally, of course, in his Mercury costume. During the run-up to the launch of the first 2-man Gemini flight with Gus Grissom and John Young, Wally and Tom Stafford were the backup crew for Gemini 3. And over at Pad 16, we had the suit-up trailer for the astronauts, and Gus and John had gone over there getting ready to suit up. And they got in the trailer, and there was Wally Schirra suited up in an old, battered Mercury pressure suit with patches and tears and just looking like a hobo off the trail. And he told Gus, he said, the backup crew is ready, and we're ready to take over in case you guys chicken out. So again, that was Wally's ability to break the ice and to level the playing field, knock away the tension, and to get everybody in a good place, getting ready for a very hazardous undertaking. So again, salute to Wally Schirra and a salute to Marquette. Mark, we hope you're having a good time out there in vacation land, enjoying your time with your family and your upcoming reunion. So again, it's a pleasure to be with you. Watching we have Lisa Marie and Cynthia Rossi. So again, greetings and welcome, and we hope you're enjoying today's broadcast of Stay Curious. As Mark says, we broadcast from the cradle of American manned spaceflight, Brevard County, and Cape Canaveral and Merritt Island in particular. We're going to be able again to reassert that particular position in history in the next couple of days with the launches of an Atlas V tomorrow and the launch of a Falcon 9 rocket on Wednesday carrying Crew 5 up to the International Space Station. It is a remarkable time for the American space program right now. We're seeing not only the continuation of the International Space Station program, but we're seeing the growth of the partnership between NASA and the commercial entities to continue these efforts. We're seeing the preparations for the launch of the Artemis 1 rocket, which is now being targeted for sometime in November. They're going to have enough time to change out those batteries on the flight termination system, and they'll also have time to allow the workers to attend to their personal details at home in recovering from Hurricane Ian. So we're looking toward that launch in, as I say, in November. But we're seeing this grand growth of commercial spaceflight in all areas. Coming up at the end of this year, we'll be seeing another commercial flight of the Spacex Crew Dragon on the Polaris Dawn mission. This mission will be 4 civilians commanded by Jared Isaacman. Jared Isaacman, who also commanded the Inspiration 4 flight. And the flight of Polaris Dawn is going to be carrying human beings to the highest point in Earth orbit that they have ever achieved. Now, back during, in 1966, Gemini 11 got as high as 850 miles above the Earth. I believe Polaris Dawn is going to exceed 870 miles above the Earth, so it will be the highest manned Earth orbiting mission in our nation's history. And in addition to that, his crew will also be performing the first commercial space walk. We're going to have 2 civilians leave that spacecraft to walk in space. It's going to be a very remarkable mission, and as I say, another evidence of this explosion in the activity of commercial flight. And as I've said before, right now, manned spaceflight in the United States is about where aviation was back in the 1920s. We're seeing the involvement of civilians, we're seeing these commercial efforts moving ahead, and we're seeing great success in them. And so I think over the next 10 years, we're going to see advances in commercial spaceflight that are going to be mind-boggling. There are already plans to add a commercial annex to the International Space Station, and when the time comes for the International Space Station to be deorbited, that annex will be separated, and that will be the first element of what will be a commercial Earth-orbiting space station. We also see that NASA is undertaking a feasibility study of using a SpaceX Dragon to rendezvous with the Hubble Space Telescope and possibly reboost her to a higher orbit. I believe since the end of the shuttle program, Hubble has lost about 50 miles in her altitude and could soon come to the time where you have to make a decision about what you're going to do. The idea of reboosting it was something that we had not imagined, but someone had the idea of contacting SpaceX and say, let's talk about this and see if this is feasible. So we might be seeing something along those lines in the near future. In any event, the strides being made by commercial spaceflight right now are just unbelievable. We're seeing things that we had never imagined in the early days of the space program. I think, as I mentioned before, in the shuttle program and all rendezvous missions, you have to perform a series of phasing burns, maneuvers to get closer and closer to your target. And on board shuttle, when you're doing a phasing burn, you had everybody in the spacecraft on console doing something. Somebody was checking the range and range rate. Another person was overseeing the computers. another flying the spacecraft itself. And these things were all being done in this constant tempo on board the vehicle. For the first manned flight of the SpaceX Crew Dragon, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, that vehicle performed a 20-minute long phasing burn, and the crew slept through the whole thing. So that gives you an idea of the incredible advancements that have been made in spaceflight due to the commercial involvement, and I think we'll be seeing a lot more of that in the future. So for right now, it is a very exciting time to be part of spaceflight here on the Space Coast and across the United States. And I would tell the young people out there who did not have the privilege of living through the Mercury, Gemini, or Apollo programs, you are experiencing something right now that your grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be writing about. You're part of history right now, and I would urge you all to watch very closely. And if you have any desires, as you see this advancement taking place, if you have any desires to become a part of that STEM world, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, I would definitely ask you to go ahead and jump in with both feet, because this is the time to be a part of it. It's a very, very exciting time for all of us in the space industry. As for the visitors complex, the general public coming there are very excited. They are very engaged. They're looking forward to the launch of the Artemis 1 rocket, which I say now has been targeted back to November now. But the people who come there and speak to the astronauts and who ask questions are very, very much engaged and very excited about the things that we're seeing now. So I would also invite you to come out to the Kennedy Space Center Visitors Complex and come see some of the displays that we have. Come see the Atlantis Space Shuttle that's on display, an Apollo Saturn V moon rocket. Come by and see that. And all of our hardware that we have from Apollo at the Apollo Saturn V Center. You can also see Alan Shepard's moon suit there from Apollo 14. And that suit is still deeply ingrained with moon dust. You can see it on the knees and on the shins and on the legs and on the feet. So you'll actually be seeing pieces of the moon brought back by Alan Shepard on his pressure suit. In any event, as I say, please come and see us over at the Visitors Complex. Today we have astronaut Don Thomas. He'll be with us, and come see Don and enjoy his stories and get to meet him and learn about what it's like to live on a spacecraft and to perform useful and valuable work in space. Marty, what else we have? We have any questions out there?
No questions. Just a lot of favorable comments on what great job you did.
Well, thank you very much. We're glad that everybody has joined us today. And we want you to stay engaged with us, not just today, but for across time as we see these things taking place on the Space Coast. The American Space Museum here has some wonderful exhibits here from all the programs. A great collection of artifacts and equipment from the space program. And Kathy Thornton's flight suit is here, as a matter of fact. Kathy was with us not too long ago over at the Visitors Complex, and she'll be coming back again, I believe, in November or December. But yes, the exhibits that you can see here at the American Space Museum are quite remarkable. If you are a veteran of the space program and have been following it ever since its inception, you'll find a lot of memories here at the museum. But also, and perhaps more importantly, if you are a young student, you have a lot to learn about the space program. This would be a good place to start, because you see it from the human side of things, not only from the astronauts, but also from the technicians, the engineers, and the men and women who worked in the trenches for the history of the space program. So for young students, I would strongly encourage you to come here and become a part of this history and learn about the incredible strides that have been made over the years, how far we've come over a relatively short period of time, and some of the things that we've been able to experience, we've been privileged to experience here on the Space Coast. Many of us take it for granted living here to be able to walk out in our backyards and see a rocket taking off over the palm trees, and that is a great thing to have in your life. For the people who live further away from us and have not had the privilege of experiencing these things, we invite you to come here, see this hardware, see this equipment, meet the people, and hopefully come here at a time when we are launching a rocket. And these opportunities to see a rocket are just increasing by leaps and bounds. When I first came here to the visitors complex in 1987, we were averaging 12 launches per year. Up on the board today, we have launched 30 rockets this year so far. So that's how far we've come and how fast we're going. And it's a remarkable privilege to be a part of the history like this. Even from a distance, it is still remarkable and something that just really leads you to realize that there's so much that we are capable of on this earth. Well, here at the Space Coast, as I say, we have the privilege of seeing these launches. Many people gather on US-1 here in Titusville to watch, and that puts you about 9 to 10 miles away from the launch pad, as I recall. And then, of course, beautiful viewing on the ocean in Cocoa Beach, and also viewing from Cape Canaveral. So all you have to do practically here in Brevard County, all you have to do is turn around and look over your shoulder, and you can see a rocket launch. It definitely puts some goose pimples in the right places, and it really spruces up your voltage to see one of these launches. And it's always different. It's never the same. It never gets old. It never gets old hat. It's always very, very exciting and very, very meaningful. I can't imagine that there's a young child in the 5 to 7 year range who would see a live launch and not be enchanted by all of this. It's simply overpowering. And we have the privilege of talking to some of these young people. And as they grow older, they come up with some incredible plans for their lives. I can remember a young girl that we spoke to at the autograph opportunity. And the astronaut asked her, well, what do you plan to do with your life? And she says, well, I haven't decided if I'm going to go to Purdue or MIT. And she meant it. She had her head set toward that goal, and I'm quite sure that she is going to accomplish it. So as I say, for the young people, very important now that you avail yourselves of these opportunities to witness and be a part of history, and to be a part of what will certainly be your future, a large part of your future, whether you take part in the space program or not, whether you just benefit from some of the things that come from this program. Because so many of the things that we take for granted today were made possible by the processes that were developed during the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo program. As I like to say, we're still getting our money back from the Apollo program to this very day. I did not mean to go on a rant or a sermon here, because I very quickly wanted to recognize a good friend of ours, astronaut Kathy Sullivan. Kathy was a member of the STS-41G crew, and she was the first American woman to perform a spacewalk. She and Dave Leitsma went outside the vehicle, and they performed a task which was a rehearsal of in-flight refueling for satellites, being able to transfer rocket fuel from one vessel to another. A very small step in what might turn out to be a very important process for our future, because as we move on with the Artemis program, we start sending hardware, equipment, and supplies to the moon. It's going to be very important that we're able to maintain our propellant supply in these missions. And I think fuel transfers like that are going to be very important. But Kathy was a big part of that first effort. She flew on 2 more shuttle flights after that. One of them, STS-33, which was the deploy of the Hubble Space Telescope. And as I can recall, we had problems deploying one of the solar panels on Hubble before the telescope was released. And so Kathy and Bruce McCandless had to go into the airlock and get into those suits, because they may very well have had to go outside and assist manually with the deploy of that solar panel. That was not the case. They did not have to do it, but they were ready to do it in case they had to. Kathy went on to a distinguished career at NOAA, and is also a retired captain in the United States Navy, which I did not realize until lately. So, Kathy, we want to wish you a very, very happy birthday, and we want to take this opportunity to thank you for all the things you've done for America's space program and for our futures. Also, again, we're celebrating the 87th birthday of our friend Charlie Duke from Apollo 16, who walked in the Sea of Descartes along with astronaut John Young. taking the lunar rover with them and making a wide-ranging exploration of the Descartes area. Charlie, we've had the pleasure of seeing him several times out at the visitors complex, and again, just such an incredible representative for the space program, an Air Force test pilot, and just one of those people. When you meet them, number one, there's a lot of friendliness there, but there's also a person there who inspires confidence. This is somebody that you would have no problem putting on top of a Saturn V moon rocket and trusting them with such a complex mission as Apollo 16. So Charlie, as you're out there, thank you very much for everything you've done for us, and we wish you a very happy birthday on this day. Many of you, incidentally, might remember Charlie from his voice as Capcom on both Apollo 10 and Apollo 11, especially on Apollo 11 during the landing. That was Charlie on the Capcom console, and he was put there at the specific request of Neil Armstrong, who had seen his performance on Apollo 10, and basically said that Charlie was the guy that he wanted there because he knew that he could communicate clearly and quickly and get the right information back and forth from the spacecraft. So again, Charlie, happy birthday, and we wish you all the best. Martin, do we have anything else over there?
No, you're good.
Well, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you very much for helping me today with this task of hosting this presentation. It was a great privilege to be asked to do this, and I thank you, and I thank Mark, who's out there in vacation land, enjoying his time out there. Thank you both very much for this. And to our viewers out there, I want to again take this opportunity to thank you for your time and watching us and supporting the space program, as I'm sure you do, and reminding you that all of us together come together in the space program to make incredible and magnificent strides toward the future for future generations. So, as Fred Gregory's father told him, take what you have and make it better for the next generation. And I think that's what all of us are able to do here on the Space Coast. And so with that, on behalf of Marty Winkle, our flight engineer, and also Mark Marquette, who's out there enjoying his vacation, we want to take this opportunity to thank you very much for coming by and hope to see you again next time on Stay Curious. Bye for now.